a letter to the church in one of the most influential cities of the ancient world. The Apostle Paul outlines the struggle between what we know we should do and what we actually do, between sin and freedom, between death and life. There was hope for ancient believers, and there is hope for believers in our day too. This ancient text shows us where to find overwhelming victory and hope for eternity. It reminds us that nothing can separate us from the love of the perfect, just, and righteous God who gives us grace upon grace. This is Paul's letter to the Romans.
Well, good morning, NorthPoint. Can we explore some contrarian thoughts today? You know what contrarians are, right? Contrarians are people who always see things differently. They see things from a different angle, and so often they go against what's usually commonly held belief or understanding, and they just poke holes in it, bringing a different perspective. Contrarians can kind of range from being amusing to being annoying to actually being pretty helpful. On the amusing side of contrarianism, you can think of people that maybe still espouse the flat earth theory, right? Like that the earth is flat, we're not actually on a sphere. Professional basketball player Kyrie Irving a number of years ago was espousing this theory on media, and people were just largely amused by him and like, Kyrie, quiet down, this is not true. But then there's annoying contrarians. These are individuals maybe that watch movies with a lot of side comments. You know what I'm talking about? And the side comments typically go like this: well, that would never happen. Well, there's no way. Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. Well, we know that's not really true or real. My wife right now is raising her hand like, I know somebody that's like that in our household. Actually, this last week, our youngest daughter, Rowan, was watching the Home Alone movies. You know, this is Kevin McAllister gets left home alone during Christmas time. And then amazingly, it happens again in the second movie. Although it's a little different this time. If you remember this one or you've seen it, his family is rushing off to the airport again. He's with them this time, but he gets separated from them in the airport. And then he goes to the boarding gate last second where he thinks his family's on the plane. And this is back in the day when you have paper boarding passes. And so he's got his paper boarding pass and he runs into the ticket agent, and all of the boarding passes fall because he's trying to actually board the wrong flight that his family's not on. But because all the paper passes fall on the ground and they're rushing to get the flight off, they're like, well, just if you know for sure in this flight, just get on the plane. I was walking from our living room into a bedroom at that moment, and as I'm watching this, I'm like, that would never happen. And Michelle's like, just let your daughter enjoy the movie. You don't always have to point these things out. So maybe that's you, maybe you do that kind of thing too. And it's just annoying. It's just annoying, that kind of contrarian. But then there's the third type of contrarian that is actually can be pretty helpful. So you think about way back to Galileo, when Galileo, working off of Copernicus, says to our world, hey, actually the earth is not at the center of the solar system. I'm pretty sure the sun is at the center of the solar system and the earth orbits around the sun. And the popular held belief basically said, you're a heretic and you're under house arrest for that because it's not true. That was a contrarian thought that was actually helpful because it turned out to be true. Or you might think of early social media whistleblowers, people that were in high positions in these tech companies that left the tech company and started saying, hey, social media can be good, but it also can be very, very damaging. And there's things you need to know that these companies are doing to make you addicted to those technologies. And they started blowing the whistle, so to speak, on what was going on. And at first everybody was like, no, we're just connecting with friends. It's just good. This is making us more social. And they're like, no, you're not. And now we're like, oh, maybe there was something to what they said, a contrarian view that actually turned out to be pretty true. Well, today in Romans chapter 8, we're introduced to some of these helpful contrarian thoughts. So if you've got your Bible, take it and turn to Romans chapter 8. It's on page 917 there in the Bibles in front of you. And I gotta say this, in one sense, when we open up this Bible, if God really gave this to us, and this is from God who created this world, shouldn't we expect that as human beings, when we read this, that we're gonna encounter what will be contrarian thoughts to us? In other words, if this is God's truth and I'm a human being, and unless I know everything, I have all of life figured out, I know where I came from, why I'm here, how life works in every possible way, then otherwise, if that isn't true, I should expect that when I read the Bible, I'm gonna be confronted with some things that I'm like, I don't know about that. Well, I'm not sure about that. Well, I'm not sure if I even like that. Is that thing really true? We should expect that there's going to have to be a lot of us coming to what God has to say here. And to us, it's going to feel like they're contrarian thoughts in terms of what we think and believe. In fact, in our passage today, in Romans 8 and verse 29, you notice that Paul's going to end up saying this. And we'll look at it more in a minute, but he says that God predestined or chose us to be conformed to the image of his Son. So part of God's choosing you and bringing you into his family is so that you would become more and more conformed to the image of Jesus. You would become like Jesus. So if this is me as a human and this is Jesus who is God, how much change do you think I should expect in my life to be conformed to the image of Jesus Christ? Probably a lot of change, right, is going to have to happen in my life. And a big part of that change is changing the way that I think, the way that I view the world with these contrarian thoughts that God brings to us. Now, we saw some of this contrarian thinking last week where Paul told us that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. When Jesus comes back to this earth and we realize eternity with our Savior Jesus Christ, all of the sufferings and the pains and the struggles we faced here will not only be wiped away, they will be turned back and agony will be turned into a glory when Jesus comes. That's a contrarian thought, right? All my suffering, all my pain, my heartache, my trials, my difficulties, my frustrations, Paul calls them in that passage the frustrations that you feel, the groanings that you even feel because things shouldn't be this way or you wish they were different. He says not only do you as a human groan and suffer, but all of creation, all of nature is groaning along with you. And we see the groaning of all this entire world in small ways and big ways. You've seen it in small ways these past couple of days where we started to turn into Iowa winter, right? Where you know it's coming and you're going to get out of your car sometimes and you're going to lose your breath because of the wind chill factor that is coming upon you. Creation growth. You're like, it's not exactly supposed to be this way. I mean, I like the cold because I like a fire inside and the warmth of inside and blankets and hot showers. I don't know, this is just me. I love that. But I don't like my nose hairs freezing when I step outside, right? And being like, am I going to die from this is creation groaning, small ways. And then in big ways too, there are frustrations, the losses that we face. And death that is such a part of the lives that we live. That is creation and us groaning and in frustration. And what God says is I'm going to turn all of that agony into a glory. That's pretty contrarian. But if we can believe that, if we can believe that God really will do that, it gives us hope. And it gives us a hope that helps us to be able to endure and to keep going in this life. And then this verse 26. In the same way, the Spirit also helps us in our present weaknesses. So in other words, the hope that God gives us of future glory for whatever we face now, that future glory helps us right now. It helps us to keep going. And also for the day-to-day lives we live and the weaknesses that we feel in our humanity, the Spirit helps us. The Spirit helps you in the day-to-day for your weakness. For example, we do not know what we ought to pray for, verse 26. But the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. Now this is interesting. Paul was just talking about how you groan and you have frustrations in this life, and creation groans and creation has frustration in this life. And it's like the Spirit of God that is put inside of the children of God. If you've trusted in Jesus, you have the Spirit in you. And it's like the Spirit picks up on your inner groanings, your inner frustrations, and he turns those groanings into prayers before God. Sometimes when you come to God, like God, I don't even know what to ask you for. I don't see how this could turn out. I'm really frustrated by this. And I'm coming to you and I'm just kind of like, take this. And you know what? God does take that, and the Spirit inside of you turns that into prayers before God. When I think of this, I kind of think about back in the day when I was growing up, eating like Campbell's alphabet soup. Do you remember Campbell's alphabet soup? I promise it's gonna go somewhere. But if you ever had it, the Campbell's alphabet soup is just a soup full of all sorts of letters that are, noodles in the shape of letters. And it's just a jumble of letters that mean absolutely nothing. Now, maybe if you're a kid, you might separate those out and you start making sentences with them. But often what happens for you and I is that our hearts and our emotions and our feelings are like Campbell's alphabet soup. It's just a bunch of jumbled up letters. And what Paul is saying is that the Spirit of God takes all of your jumbled up letters and frustrations and groanings, and he turns them into sentences, which are prayers before God. Look at verse 27. He who searches our hearts, that's God the Father. He's searching us. He knows the mind of the Spirit because the Spirit that's in you intercedes or prays for God's people in accordance with the will of God. And so something like this is happening. The groanings, the sufferings, the frustrations that we have in this life that we think and we feel in our minds and in our hearts, but we don't always know what to do with, but we're just frustrated by them. The Spirit takes all of those things and he matches them up with the will of God. So here's us in our hearts and here's the will of God. And the Spirit says, let me bridge the gap between those two things so that I can bring the will of God into your reality. And I'll take your groanings before God the Father. That's what the Spirit is doing for us. Absolutely amazing. The Spirit helps us in our weaknesses, even when we don't know how to pray. He prays for us. So here's our first contrarian thought. Might be different than what you're thinking. The first contrarian thought is this: weakness then can be good. This means that our weaknesses can be good. Because the weakness that we feel and all the frustration and the groaning and the struggles can bring us before God for help. And he wants to help us. Weakness here in verse 26 probably means suffering, kind of that groaning and the frustrations that we feel. But I think these weaknesses can also mean sin, the sins that we face, the sins that we have done, the ways that we have violated what God wants for our lives. But the weakness can also mean weariness, and it can mean heartache, and it can mean loss, and it can even mean weak faith. You ever feel like you have weak faith? Like, yeah, I follow God. Yeah, I'm following God. Yeah, I'm sort of following God. You ever feel like that in your life where the faith is pretty weak? That's a weakness. And certainly it means being so weak that you're like, I don't even know what to pray for. I'm uncertain of how this could turn around. I don't know how it could change. I don't really know what the right decision to make is. I don't see how this could work out. And in those moments, those weaknesses, the Spirit picks you up. The Spirit has got you. Don't let your weakness, in other words, keep you from coming before God. See, the typical way, think about this with me. The typical way that you and I face our weaknesses, when you know you have a weakness in your life, what is the default setting of our culture? What does our culture tell us to do with our weaknesses? Hide it, right? Conceal it. Don't let anybody know or you'll be vulnerable and people will take advantage of your weaknesses. So you can't let other people know you have weaknesses and just deny it yourself and act like you don't even have them. Elsa in Frozen helped us with this, right? Conceal, don't feel, don't let them know, right? Be the good girl you're always meant to be. Like you gotta do that. You gotta hide it from other people. I think about some, Iowa is known for wrestling, one of the things it's known for, among other things, wrestling. And every once in a while you get one of these stories. I think this happened a year or two ago where one of the premier Iowa wrestlers wrestled most of his season or the entire season with a torn ACL. And nobody knew that he had a torn ACL the entire season. Why did nobody know that he had a torn ACL? Because he realized, I'm still gonna wrestle with this, but if I tell my opponents that I have a torn ACL, what are they gonna do? They're gonna go for that leg over and over again. It makes me vulnerable. And so we think that with our weaknesses, well, that makes me vulnerable. I gotta hide it, I gotta deny it, I can't admit it, I can't let anybody know, or they'll take advantage of it. And then sometimes when we are motivated to do something about our weaknesses, which we're kind of wired that way to do something about it, you know what we do? We try to learn our way out of our weaknesses. I'm gonna get a book on this. I'm gonna get 7 principles. I'm gonna get 5 practices. I'm gonna do a training course. There's a YouTube video for everything. I'm gonna watch a do-it-yourself YouTube video to improve my life and to make me better with the weaknesses that I have. Because we think weakness is all bad and I have to take care of it by myself. But Noah, not only do you not have to take care of it by yourself, but can I tell you, you can't often take care of it by yourself. We don't just learn our way out of these things. And since that is true, not only do I not have to, but I can't get out of it by myself, God gives us the Spirit to help us in those weaknesses. Notice a couple of things really carefully that are going on here with the simple statement that the Spirit helps us in our weaknesses. The first thing that has to mean is that God knows you're weak. That nothing is a surprise to God, and God knows that you have weaknesses. So when you bring your weaknesses before God, even if it's just with open hands, like help me, like this, right? God is not singing the song to you, loser, lame-o, wannabe, right? He's not like, why did I bring you into my family? Why did I make you a Christian? Why did I let you know? You're really bringing the family down, loser, right? I can't believe that you would do this. Buck up, buttercup. Like God is not doing that thing to us, right? He actually factored your weakness into his plan. He knew that it was going to be this way, and he's not surprised by it at all. Somebody sent me an email this last week reflecting on some thoughts from last Sunday's message, and part of that was a quote that she put in the email that said this: when God put a calling on your life, he already factored in your stupidity. Rather blunt, but kind of helpful, right? When God put a call on your life, he factored in your stupidity. He factored in your weakness. He factored in your past. He factored in your struggles. He factored in your sins. He factored in all of those things, and he knows. He knows that we have weakness. One of my favorite verses in the Bible that I often go to is in the Psalms that says, he knows our frame and he is mindful that we are but dust. Now that might be like, well, that's degrading to me. Well, don't let it be degrading. Let it be joyful and reassuring that God knows. I'm weak. I'm a human being. I have struggles. So if God knows it and he made provision for your weakness by giving us the Spirit, can I encourage you not to be surprised by your weaknesses either, but to expect them? To expect them in different seasons or things that you've struggled with for a long time or things that come back or things that come up. Don't be surprised by your weaknesses. Don't be like my kids when they were very young and it was bedtime. And every single day when we have to go to bed, you know what the response was? Why do we have to go to bed? Why do we have to? They're absolutely surprised. Parents, are you in this stage with your kids where it's like, we have to do this every day, every single day? You're the worst parents in the world making us go to bed? And I'm like, yeah, and we're going to do this again tomorrow. And they're like, yeah, we are going to do this again tomorrow because you're evil, right? It's just a surprise that people have to go to sleep. And then I just try to remind them, look, when you get to my age, you're happy to go to sleep and you want to go to bed. And sometimes you go to bed when you're not even supposed to go to bed. Like you just fall asleep and stuff. So like, get used to it, right? Don't be surprised. Don't be surprised by your weaknesses. Don't try to hide it. It's good to learn, but don't just learn your way out of it. You can't. Instead, can you see it as an invitation to come to God, who knows that you have weaknesses, and he's inviting you to come in, because just maybe the weakness is there to draw you to him. I mean, he's so gracious that he acknowledges sometimes you might be so weak you don't even know what to say. You just come with open hands and you don't even have words for what you're feeling. And he's like, I've got you. I'll pick you up in that moment. Do you know that that's really the essence of prayer? The essence of prayer before God is not a formula, and it's not saying exactly the right words. It's just coming to him. It's just looking to him and opening up your hands before him. I don't know if any of you like or have read the Far Side comics, but Gary Larson, back in the day, these were printed in newspapers and there's whole books full of them, and I've always enjoyed these. Here's one of my favorite ones. I'll let you try to read it if you can and see if you can get it. It's a guy on an island, and then a guy in a helicopter, and the guy in the helicopter is saying, wait, cancel that, I guess it says health. Instead of help, of course, if you got to explain the joke, it kind of ruins it, but I wasn't sure if you could read it, There's a commercial that's out that's kind of like this one right now, where there's a guy that is trapped on a desert island, and he is just like, there's different scenes of his life trying to survive, trying to work through it, trying to get off the island. Finally, he ends up getting rescued by a helicopter, like after like days and days and days. And when he's in the helicopter, he turns to the helicopter pilot and he says, oh, are you from search and rescue? And the helicopter pilot says, no, I'm from the resort that's right there on the island. And she points to the resort that's on the island where he thought he was stranded all alone the whole time. So it's, kind of like that. So here's what I want you to think about. Is this the way that God treats you when you come before him and you're just like, He said, you got to pray right. Come on, man. Figure this out. Learn how to pray. I've given you instructions. Jesus gave you a model prayer. The New Testament is full of prayers. You should know how to do this better. I've given you the Lord's Prayer for you to pray. You could just recite that if I want to. God doesn't say any of those things to you. He says, I've given you the provision of the Spirit to help you when you don't know how to pray. Just come. Just come to me. Now, of course, I think this doesn't mean that we shouldn't learn how to pray and that we shouldn't grow in our prayers. Jesus did give us a model. The New Testament is full of prayers for us, and the Old Testament as well. But it just acknowledges that there are times when we're overwhelmed, when we're uncertain, when we're unclear. And in those moments, isn't it amazing to think that the Spirit is taking our unclear thoughts and making them very clear to God the Father as to what you need? This is how your weakness can be good. When it leads you to come to your Father who has placed his Spirit in you, and you can just say, help. Even when you don't have the words, he's got you. So can I ask you, what's your current weakness? The current weakness that you're working through and processing in your life? I should maybe say your current weakness that you are aware of, just to remind us we all have plenty of them and many we probably don't know that might come up in the future. But what's the current weakness that you're aware of? A difficult time? Maybe you are lacking faith. Maybe you have fear or anxiety. Maybe you're feeling unsuccessful or vulnerable in some way. Maybe you've failed. You're sinning and you're struggling. You're having a hard time overcoming that temptation. Maybe you're grieving a loss, or maybe you're just tired. Could you allow whatever that weakness is that you're feeling acutely in your life right now to bring you before the Father with a Spirit who is praying for you, who is putting the words together, seeing the groanings of your heart and bringing them before a Father who loves you? And then recognize this, that God is also doing something amazing. Verse 28, and we also know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, for those who have been called according to his purpose. This is our second contrarian thought. Not only is weakness potentially good, but also bad can be good. Bad can be good. Now, I don't mean Michael Jackson bad, like as in, okay, I'm not gonna sing it, but I'm bad, you know what I'm bad? Okay, not like bad good, like we sometimes talk about bad being good, but actual bad things can be good. Here's how we normally think. We have an equation, I think, that we kind of operate under, and the equation goes something like this. Good equals good and bad equals bad, right? So the good things that happen to me in life, those are always good, and the bad things that happen to me are always bad. So good, like I get a promotion, that's good, it's good, right? I get invited to something, that's good, it's good. I have friends, that's good, so that equals good. I wake up and it's not super humid, and so I have a good hair day, right? And so it's good. Good hair day, it makes it a good day, it's good. But the other side of our equation is bad always equals bad, right? So if I get a demotion or if I lose my job, that's bad. So it's bad, right? If I don't have friends, that's bad, it's bad. If I don't get invited, bad. It just goes together. Bad hair day, it might be a bad day, right? Because bad equals bad. Good equals good and bad equals bad. Well, cross this out because that's not God's equation. God's equation, according to verse 28, goes something like this. Whether good or bad, it can all be good. Right? God can turn the good things and the bad things, whatever they are, all of those things into good. That's what verse 28 says. In all things, everything that happens can be turned to good, which has to mean that all the suffering and the groaning and even the frustration that I feel in my life, which is real heartache and real pain, but that real pain can be turned into good. God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love him. Now, if that's true, if this is God's equation and that's true, that means we probably need to reconsider freaking out about every inconvenience, every speed bump, every supposed accident, and every negative thing that happens. Any of you freaker-outers, right? You just freak out about what's happening. You're like, and you're just kind of panicked about it, and this bad thing is just horrible. Some of you don't freak out, you just complain about everything, right? You're like, Jeremy, I'm very calm as I complain about every bad thing that happens, right? So you don't freak out, but you just gotta, or you've got the Eeyore thing, where you're like, oh, my life is terrible, my life is horrible, glass half empty, always pessimistic about it. A lot of times, one of those three things are our responses. We freak out, or we complain, or we kind of got the Eeyore thing going on because we're looking from a human equation standpoint. Good equals good, bad equals bad. But God is saying to you, no, I can take good or bad and I can turn it into good. That's the power that I have in my power. We know, 28, we have absolute confidence that in all things, in everything, God is working for the good. For the good of, he says, those who love him and those who are called according to his purpose. Which is interesting because it means that this truth is not actually for every human. It's for the humans that love him and that are called according to his purpose. Called according to his purpose means that God chose you to be in his family, and he made sure that as you live this life, his Spirit drew you to him so that you could see that Jesus is glorious and that Jesus is good and that Jesus died on the cross and he resurrected from the grave to bring you into the family of God, and God called you into that, gave you the faith even to believe in him, and because of his love for you, you love him. You love him and you want to walk with him and you want to follow him. Not perfectly, not every single moment of every day, but your heart commitment is towards loving him and following him as his follower. And for those individuals called by God, loved by God, and loving God, God is turning all things into good for you. But I think we should probably state this contrarian thought a little bit differently, because you notice carefully that Paul does not say all things are good. Did you catch that? Paul does not say everything is good or all things in and of themselves are good. He doesn't call bad things good. And that's really important because it acknowledges that actual bad things do happen to us, and we don't have to be sentimental or optimistic about them. We don't have to be kind of Pollyanna and be like, bring on the pain, bring on the suffering. The more pain, the better it is. This is really good. Some of you maybe felt what I'm talking about here. When you're going through a hard time or you're going through a suffering or a difficulty, some well-meaning person that is trying to encourage you and come alongside of you just slaps a Bible verse, or they throw a Bible verse at you. Well, I know that you just lost all of these people and your life is really terrible, but God works all things together for good. Buck up, buttercup, it's gonna be okay. Don't you really trust God? And you're like, maybe, but I wanna slap you right now, is what I wanna do, right? Because it minimizes the pain. It might trivialize the bad, right? And so you're like, I don't know if you get it. Yeah, I believe that, but also it's hard. And God knows that it's hard. So God is not calling us to deny pain or that bad things happen at all. There are bad things that happen. There are bad people. There are bad decisions. There are bad things. But what Paul is saying is that even in those, God can turn it all around for good. He has an amazing way in his miracle working power to turn the bad things into good in our lives. So maybe to get a little bit more accurate, we should say it this way. Bad things can be turned for good. God can turn bad things and bad experiences into good. So we don't have to be overly optimistic and act like we're totally fine and welcome the pain and be martyrs about pain. No. But at the same time, we're not pessimistic either. We're not freaking out about the difficulties of life because we know that God can turn the worst things into good. In fact, we know something better than that. God has turned the worst things into good. He turned a crucifixion and the death of the Son of God into a resurrection and life for humanity that believes in him. He is going to turn all of our sufferings into a glory. How can he do that? It still blows my mind. I still don't know. I wish I could give you an answer. How is God going to turn suffering into glory? But it's a promise from him. And anybody that has left this life as a child of God is experiencing that glory right now. And so if he can do that, and he has done that, you know that he can turn your suffering, your job loss, your friend loss, your accident, even your sin, he can turn it into good. There's an old story of a Chinese farmer who had a horse that ran away. And when the horse ran away, all of the villagers got together with him at the end of the day and they said, "Oh, we are so sorry for you. This is such a terrible thing that has happened to you." And they came to commiserate with him. "This is so terrible." To which the farmer replied, "Maybe. We'll see." The next day, the horse returned to the farmer with 7 wild horses. And the villagers all got together with the guy again at night and they said, "Hey, look at this. What a fortunate turn of events. You now have 8 horses. This is amazing." To which the old farmer replied, "Maybe. We'll see." The next day, his son tried to break one of the wild horses. And as he was trying to break one of the wild horses, he was thrown off of the horse and he broke his leg. As you can imagine, the villagers got together with the old farmer again and said, "Oh, how tragic this is. This is absolutely terrible. This happened to your son." To which the farmer again replied, "Maybe. We'll see." The next day, some soldiers from the king's army came around to enlist young men for the war that was taking place. And when they saw the old man's son with a broken leg, they allowed him to stay with his father instead of being drafted into the war. To which the villagers all got together and said, "How amazing is this? You get to keep your son." And the old farmer once again, as you can imagine, said, "Maybe. We'll see." The story could go on and on and on, of course, but the point of it is this: what seems to be good isn't always good. And what seems to be bad isn't always bad. Our direct equation in human way of thinking is not always correct, where good equals good and bad equals bad. And actually, as followers of Jesus Christ, we know that God's equation is far better. Whether good or bad, he is transforming it all for good. He's transforming it all for good. Look, in your life and with what you have going on, I don't know how he's going to do that exactly. And I don't know when, and we don't give God timelines, and we don't force that upon him. We seek to trust him with the time and the how and the when. When it comes to sin, I might add this, also a part of that process of God turning bad into good is us repenting and yielding our hearts to him and opening our hands and saying to him, I'm sorry, and please help me in your grace and help me to make a plan and help me to trust you with that. We need to do that. We also are not the ones who define what good is. We leave that up to him. But as you look to him and as you trust in him, you have to believe, we know that he is working all things for the good of those who love him. I asked you a little bit ago to think about your weakness. Could you now think about the bad that you are facing? Bad from someone else, bad from circumstances, maybe bad from your past or your own decisions. Here's a way to think about it. What really stinks in your life right now that you probably wish wasn't there? Without minimizing the pain or the struggle at all, can you trust that God is working for your good? You might not see it yet, you might not understand it exactly, but he is with you, and he has given you the Spirit. And that Spirit is praying for you right now, and he will turn it all around for good. Somehow, some way, someday, he'll do it. In fact, look at this amazing promise in verse 29. Here's his purpose. For those that God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. This is speaking about God's knowledge of all events in the history of the world. And before the world was ever created, he knew who would be in his family. He knew you. He knew that he would create you. He knew he would bring you into this world. And he also predestined or chose you to be in his family. And he chose you to be conformed to the image of his Son, this Son Jesus, so that Jesus might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. Now, firstborn in the Bible typically doesn't just mean firstborn the way we think of it. It means the first in priority or the first in preeminence. Jesus is the first in preeminence because he, as the first Son of God in that sense, died and resurrected from the grave, being the first of many that would follow after him, right? Through faith in him. Here, the focus on firstborn is that there are no only children in the family of God. Like some of you are only children. Any only children's? How do you say that? I don't know. Somebody help me. Children? Only children, okay? There's some only children. You're not an only child if you've trusted in Jesus Christ, right? There are no single children in the family of God. He is the first among many sons and daughters. I think about this for my 5 daughters. They've always wanted a brother, right? We love it. We love I got the girl dad life. It's amazing. It's wonderful. I talked to you about that. But they have all wanted to have a brother at some point. I got to tell you, girls, you have a brother. And he's the greatest brother you could ever possibly have. His name is Jesus Christ. He is your older brother. You couldn't wish for a better older brother in the family of God. That's what Jesus does for you. And those God, verse 30, those God predestined or chose to come into this family, he also called you. Like in your real human life, as you're living this life in time, God made sure that you heard the gospel message about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And he made sure that you had the faith and the ability to be able to believe in him. He called you into his family and invited you in. And those he called, he justified. He made sure you had the righteousness that you need to stand before him. And those he justified, he glorified. He got you through to the end when all glory is revealed. You get to participate in that fully and completely with your older brother, Jesus Christ, because he made it possible. Now look, those 2 verses create a lot of questions for people about predestination and foreknowledge and election and even terms like Calvinism and Arminianism. If you don't know those terms, don't worry about it. It's okay. You can leave it behind. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in Romans. But look, for all those questions, don't miss what Paul is saying here. What he is telling you is God finished what he starts. He finishes what he starts. He knew you before you were ever born, and he will get you there in the very end. He has saved you. He is saving you. He will save you completely. And so here's our final contrarian thought. We are good with God because of grace. We are in with God. We are good with God. God sees you as good because of his grace in Jesus Christ. We sing this song, In Christ Alone, and one of the stanzas from that song go like this: from life's first cry to final breath, Jesus commands my destiny. No power of hell, no scheme of man could ever pluck me from his hand. Till he returns or calls me home, here in the love of Christ, we stand. That's what this is saying. From foreknowledge to glorification, God has got you. Now, the reason that this is a bit of a contrarian thought, maybe not as much as the other ones, but it is contrarian because what it says to us is it's not about your rituals that you perform. It's not about your performance and what you do at all. This is God's sovereign choice, executed through his son, Jesus Christ, life, death, and resurrection. God even takes weak, struggling people who don't know how to pray, and he turns you into saints, and he helps you along the way. We're good with God because he predestined us and calls us and justifies us and glorifies us. He is with us and he's working. So will you trust him? Will you trust him? Will you let your weakness, will you let the bad that is happening, that you are experiencing, draw you to his mercy and his love? And if you don't know what to pray, just say, Spirit, help me. Don't deny your weakness or your pain. Don't try to hide it or cover it up. He is here for you. Come to him. Can we do this together as his people? You know, NorthPoint, can I talk to you for a minute? Those of you that are maybe visiting, you've been checking out this church and you're kind of deciding, is this my church? Am I going to be here? I invite you in. I hope you will. I hope God calls you here, and I hope you come in, and I hope you're a part of us. But for those of us that you are in, you're like, yes, this is it. Can we do this? Can we believe this? Can we know together that God is always working even when we don't see it? Like you, God is doing this in my life, allowing weakness and bad things to draw me to him. I haven't shared much about this lately, but for those of you that have been around, you know that back in 2017, my wife, Michelle, went through a major health situation, and she was diagnosed at the time with ulcerative colitis, and she ended up losing her colon and going through multiple surgeries and recovery process, and that was a very hard time, but you were there for us. God was there for us, as he always is. For the last 7 years, she's been in a pretty good place. As you can imagine, there are challenges when you have a surgery like that, but it's been pretty good. And then about 2 months ago, her disease came back with a vengeance, and she got a little different diagnosis. We thought it was this, but no, it probably is more like this, and you're gonna have to get on a treatment plan, and you're gonna have surgery, and you're gonna have to go through these things. And so this kind of came out of nowhere. Some of you have faced this where you think things are going well, and then all of a sudden you're like in the hospital and you're having surgery and you're like, what is going on and what's the future gonna be? And so we went through lots of tests and diagnostics, and she, after the surgery, experienced just a ton of pain. But over the last 2 or 3 weeks, she's been just slowly improving and getting better. And along the way, those of you that know, you just prayed for us, you've loved us, you've cared for us, and we so appreciate your love and your support in that way. I've seen you do this for others. I've seen this church in small groups and in Bible studies and in friendships just say, how can I carry your burden, and how can I love you, and how can I support you? You do so great with that. But what I want to say about this is that what we're going through, and Michelle is going through, is bad. It's not good. God does not take pleasure in allowing it to happen. It's a part of living in the fallen world that we live in, and sometimes we face bad circumstances and bad things, right? And so God doesn't call us to say, oh, this is wonderful, this is great, I'm so happy this has come in. And so we don't do that with this thing that's taking place. But in the weakness, and in the pain, and in the struggle, we do believe that God is working all things for our good. When I read Romans chapter 8, I just keep going back to verse 18. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory. I believe that. We believe that. And I believe verse number 26, that the Spirit helps us in the acute weakness that I feel today, and that you might feel tomorrow. And that you're feeling with what you have going on. The Spirit, like God has placed himself in us to strengthen us, even when we're weak and we don't know what to pray. And then verse 28, He is working all things together for good. Can we believe that together? Can we trust that? Can we know that together, that God is working? And even when we have those moments where we're just like, I am at my end and I don't know, just come to him and just open your hands. He knew you would be at this place, and he's given you the Spirit to help you in that weakness. Let's trust him together. Let's keep looking to him together.